Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the Extra Mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now, your host, Jackson Mummy, owner of the Celebration Bar Review.
Well, hey everybody, welcome to episode 298 of the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. This is your host, Jackson Mummy. If you are watching today's episode of the podcast, you notice that there's a beautiful beach and a swaying palm tree behind me, but social distancing has been taken care of. There's no one on the beach. If you're just listening, well, you can imagine that same picture for yourself. In any event, we're glad to have you here with us. We hope everybody is healthy and staying safe. This has obviously been another crazy week when it comes to the COVID-19 virus and the bar exam. There have been a lot of things happening during the week. We're going to break all that down for you in today's episode of the podcast. It was also a week in which we got the very first results from jurisdictions around the country. We've got, I think, 5 jurisdictions that I'm aware of that released results on Thursday and Friday. And so we have that information, and now we can tell you a bit more about the uniform bar exam, the subjects that were tested, and also give you some comparison numbers of mean scores on each essay. I think you're going to find that to be interesting information as well. Now, I want to just let everyone know that we'll jump into all of this information about COVID-19 and we'll talk about the UBE. But if you're thinking that you want to take the bar exam in July 2020, or maybe it now will be the fall of 2020, or perhaps even in February of 2021, we've prepared an entirely new webinar for you. It's titled, Now is the Best Time to Take the Bar Exam, Why You Should Ignore the Crowd and the Fear. What we've done is to take a look at the current situation and then explore what it means for bar exam takers. It is a solid, jam-packed hour of information, and we do a live Q&A at the end to bring you up to date and answer any questions you might have as the situation is changing. Now, we're doing these webinars several times a week, and we're doing a live Q&A with every one of them. So I'm going to invite you to go to celebrationbarreview.com/now so that you can register for the next episode of this webinar. It's completely free, and I encourage you to jump on with us, find out the strategy that we think is going to work in this upcoming set of exams, and we do have a very specific strategy, and to also get a sense of why it's important to ignore the crowd and the fear right now. We're going to break it all down for you. So head out to celebrationbarreview.com/now. Go ahead and register, find the date and time that work best for you, and then we'll see you on this special free training webinar. We've had great response to it and look forward to seeing you there. Well, of course, no sooner had we finished recording the intro for this episode than we got additional new information. I wanted to make sure I got that to you as well. Just a few minutes ago, the National Conference announced that they're going to offer an exam, a full bar exam, twice in the fall. First dates will be September 9th and 10th, and a second date, and this is the big surprise, September 30th and October 1st. So they'll have an exam at the beginning of September and one at the end of September. And then they've set it up to individual jurisdictions to decide whether to go forward with the July test as planned or to choose one of the 2 fall dates. Now, we don't know whether or not a state could take both fall dates. It doesn't seem like that's what they're doing, but we're not entirely clear on that. It's also not clear whether or not the test at the beginning of September would be the same as the test at the end of September. I'm trying to wrap my head around that. Historically, the examiners would be loath to put a test in the wild for 3 or 4 weeks before the second test, so I'm thinking it's got to be another test, but they have not said for sure what that would be. We're still looking at the May 5th date as to the sort of the decision date for whether or not to offer the July exam. So that's where we stand at this moment. And I would say that the reason behind this that the examiners gave for the 2 alternative fall dates is to give jurisdictions additional flexibility. And so I'm thinking that what they're trying to do is to get jurisdictions to give the test and not jump into the diploma privilege or the alternative licensing system. So I think that this is an interesting development. We'll keep you informed, obviously, as we go forward. But those are the dates for the jurisdictions like New York, Hawaii, Massachusetts, and Connecticut that have decided that they're definitely not giving a July exam. You want to be looking at those dates of September 9th and 10th, or September 30th and October 1st. And I think we'll just wait to hear as individual states make a decision about which of those 2 dates they want to follow, if any. So there you go. That's our up-to-the-minute update. All right. I want to jump right into the UBE results as we're seeing them right now. And while we don't have state release results yet, we don't have overall pass numbers, we're going to wait another week or so till we get a few more numbers in. Most of these jurisdictions that reported results are relatively small. So as a result, we're not going to give you an overall number yet on pass rates. But I did find it interesting now. We've got the official markers of what the topics were on the essays and some markers about what the average or the mean score was on the 0 to 6 point scaling score. So let's take a look at that. The first essay on the multi-state essay exam, or the UBE, was a contracts question. This was a common law contracts question, so no UCC here at all. Using the average scoring methodology, the average score looks to be around 3.7 on a 6-point scale. So if you got a 3 on that essay, you're below the mean. You would consider that probably to be a failing score. If you got a 4, 5, or 6, then you passed on that particular question. It was one of the 2 easiest questions on the exam, and so I think it's important to have that background. The second question on the exam was a real property question. There had been some questions about whether or not it was a crossover with agency or some other things, but the examiners are calling it a real property question. And the mean here was 3.4. So again, if you had a 3, you're just under the mean. If you had a 4, you're over it, and that would be the demarcation line that you'd be looking for. Question number 3 was a civil procedure question. Again, obviously it's federal civil procedure and not state. And once again, the score that was the mean was 3.4. So another question at that 3.4 level. Question 4 on the exam was UCC Article 9, secured transactions. This question, again, had a mean of 3.4. So you can see that most of the questions are falling in that range. The real property, Civ Pro, and secure transactions were all at 3.4. That was the mean. So again, you needed to be at a 4, 5, or 6. Question 5, this was interesting. This gave people a lot of trouble. It was an agency question. And we had people saying, is it agency torts or maybe some other crossover? But the examiners are saying it was a straight up agency question. However, it had the lowest overall score at 3.3. So if you got a slightly lower score on agency than you did, let's say, on contracts, it wouldn't have hurt you quite as much. So 3.3 was the average score on the agency question. And then question number 6 was the only crossover as far as the examiners were concerned. This was evidence and criminal procedure. And in this question, this was the easiest question on the exam, or the second easiest along with contracts. It was a 3.7 average score. So again, you needed to be at that 4 or higher. Now, what all that means is that when you're looking at your scores, if you're in a jurisdiction that gives you scores back, if you were not successful, you are looking for 4s, 5s, and 6s. Anything below that probably means you failed that exam. As for the 2 performance tests, we don't have a lot of information yet, but I can tell you that the mean was around 3.5 on both of them. So pretty equally divided in terms of the scoring. And again, that 3.5 means that you want to be at 4 or better. Now, we want to congratulate everybody that passed in those jurisdictions. The results came out last week. This week, we'll have a few more UBE jurisdictions releasing results. And then the week after that, we'll actually start to see some big results coming from Florida. And once we get some of these big states in, I think we're going to know more about the overall pattern. And we'll have some information to give you in terms of the overall pass rates in the states that have reported. So good luck to those of you that are waiting for your exams and those of you that were unsuccessful in these states. We encourage you to stay with us, watch today's episode so you get a sense about what's going on with COVID-19 and how you might react to that from a bar exam standpoint. But definitely want to see you on the webinar, because I think that we're talking specifically to people who are in your situation, and I think you're going to find it really helpful. So make sure you jump on the webinar at celebrationbarreview.com/now. All right. Well, for the balance of today's episode, what I want to do is share with you the conversation that our senior editor and mentor, Megan Saya, and I had earlier in the week, talking about the update on COVID-19, what it means for the bar exam, and what it means for students as they're trying to figure out their July schedule or their September fall schedule or February 2021, whatever it might be. As always, we'll encourage you to check out the updates, the latest updates, and we'll post links here in the show notes. Now, let me just say that if you'd like to watch today's episode, you can do that by going to celebrationbarreview.com/298. If you'd like to listen, you can do that on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, radio.com, Spotify, lots of other places. So however you like to get your podcast, make sure you do that, and then make sure you register for the webinar and check in with us. All right, so let's jump into our discussion that Megan and I held just a couple of days ago about coronavirus and the bar exam. So here's what's going on today. We do have results that came out this morning in North Carolina, and we had results earlier this week in North Dakota. They are both UBE states, and I wanted to share with you, we had a student in North Dakota who took the exam and passed, and Jeffrey wrote to me after he got his results. He said, I absolutely love mind mapping, the group calls, and your lectures, especially the Marvel ones. Well, of course. And he said, I used intuitive thinking, but I read slowly. And so once I got through the reading, the 90 seconds were almost up. But once I got through the reading, it was easy to pick out the answer intuitively. And he passed, and hopefully Jeffrey is going to agree to do a video with me. I think he's got a great story, and I'd love to share it with you. So congratulations to him. Congratulations to everyone else that's getting passing results today around the country. We are still expecting all the results to come in on time. Florida will be the first big jurisdiction to release results, probably, I think, the biggest when they release, and that should be middle of April. So we will let you all know what's going on there. So let's start. I guess the place to start would be to talk about coronavirus and what's happened, the updates and questions. We've got a fair amount of those kinds of questions during the week, right?
Yes, yeah, definitely. Because everything, within a week, so much changes. So yes, every week, I'm sure this is going to be our constant theme for a while, which is good. So, all right. So I think the first question and sort of the most important update right now is which jurisdictions have canceled the July 2020 exam already?
No one has canceled it, but 3 jurisdictions have announced that they're going to postpone to the fall, at least at this point. And those are New York, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. We checked the National Conference website just before we went live today, and as of, a few minutes ago, those were still the only 3 jurisdictions announcing a postponement. There's been a lot of discussion, particularly in New York, about not giving an exam, and we're going to talk about that, and we're going to dig into that a little bit more. But to be clear, no jurisdiction has announced that they have canceled the exam. They're all, at least at this point, discussing either a July exam date or a fall exam date, which would be one date in the fall, most likely early September, I think, that the national conference would organize so that the multi-state could be given as well as the state parts of the exam.
The one other state is Hawaii, too.
Hawaii did?
Mention that in there, yeah.
Oh, I missed that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hawaii said they're going to postpone to fall?
Hawaii to the fall. Mm-hmm.
Okay,
yeah.
Well, that's all right.
Okay, great. So given all this sort of uncertainty, we had a question. Someone who's registered for the UBE in Washington State, where obviously there's been quite a few cases, and they were wondering, should I register for another jurisdiction like DC, California, another UBE?
Yeah, it's a good question. And the National Conference actually addressed this in their FAQs. First of all, just to narrow this down, Washington State is a UBE jurisdiction, one of 32. California is not. So if you were going to take the California exam, it would be a whole different exam to study for. And I would not switch into California. It's a ridiculously hard exam. And I'm not sure that there's any advantage at all to going into California. I recognize for some people who are foreign trained attorneys, you're going to have a smaller subset of jurisdictions where you can apply to sit for the exam. So you have to talk or check out the examiner's websites in those states to see if your specific educational credentials would apply. But having said that, let's say you're in Washington State and you are eligible to sit in any UBE jurisdiction. Could you switch out of the state that you thought was going to postpone into a state that you think maybe is going to give the test in July? The national conference has said, as far as they're concerned, that's fine, and that score would still be applicable back to the state where you started for 24 months. So if I were in the West, right now I'd be looking at New Mexico because it's a small state. The numbers should be manageable. If there's going to be a July exam, that's one of the states where I would think that right now it's likely to have the test if you wanted to take it in July. On the other hand, you could sit tight in Washington, wait to see what they do, and maybe I would think, and this is just pure speculation on my part, but I would expect Washington State to be one of the states that would push back to the fall because, as you said, Megan, it's where the pandemic has been hard hit. And so you could certainly stay with that and have a little bit of extra study time. But you do have the ability, it looks like, if you're a UBE student, to move around jurisdictions. I think this is more likely for New York bar takers who will have decided that they, for whatever reason, they don't want to sit or wait for an exam in New York, and they switch out. But I also think, practically speaking, whatever they do in New York is what New Jersey is going to do. And I would not be surprised if DC follows that as well. So I think what you're really going to be doing is looking at rural jurisdictions like North Dakota, New Mexico, Montana, places that give the UBE but are much smaller. And, you and I speculated on this, a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about, what happens if all of these New Yorkers suddenly show up in New Mexico. That could be a real interesting circumstance. So nobody knows. The date that we're still looking at for the NCBE to make their announcement about what they plan to do is May 5th. So that, I think, is the date to circle on your calendars. That will tell us a lot at that point. But as you're seeing, we've got states individually making decisions now. So it may be decided long before May 5th. I mean, we may know that virtually every state's going to push back off of the July date.
All right, great. Next question is, can I, well, this is kind of, you've answered it, the forum shopping, as it were, for which UBE exam I sit for. So should people wait until their jurisdiction cancels or postpones the exam, the July exam, or should they be starting to do that now, thinking about another place?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would look at the deadlines for application. Now, it might be that states will waive those deadline dates, but until they say they've done it, you can't assume it. So if you're thinking you might leave your jurisdiction and you have another one in mind, I would go check the examiner's website in that other jurisdiction, check with them and see what they would allow you to do. It seemed to me, I don't know what your take on this was, Megan, but when I read the NCBE statement, it seemed like they were deferring to individual state jurisdictions to make that call about what the deadlines might be. So some states may be more open, but others are probably going to be tougher and close their borders, if you will. So in any event, I would continue, and you're going to hear this, our repeating theme is I would be studying now anyway for the UBE. It's the same test whether you take it in New Mexico or New York, so you should be studying now, but you want to be thinking about this jurisdictional change and what the deadlines are.
Yeah, one thing I just want to point out that I found interesting is in all of the materials that the NCBE has put out about coronavirus and sort of what's happening, they are very much trying to emphasize that, like, hey, we are a nonprofit who writes the test. We are not the people giving the test, which is very interesting. So I really get the sense from them, and Jackson, let me know if you agree or disagree, but I'm getting the sense from the national conference that they're trying to be very, like, don't shoot the messenger kind of with this, and say, hey, we're leaving all this up to the jurisdictions. This is not our call. Don't be mad at us. But we're going to prepare materials for the jurisdictions if they want to give a fall exam, but that really they're not going to be the ones making any decisions.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's a good read. I think the other part of it is some people have said, well, could there be multiple dates in the fall? And the answer is no. The NCBE can only make, or has said they will only make two versions of the exam, a July 2020 version and, if needed, a fall version. And the other part of this is you have to have enough people taking the exam to have a statistically valid sampling so that you can equate the exams. We don't know what that number is. We've been hypothesizing around 10,000 bar takers nationally. There are 45,000 bar takers typically in a July exam. We would have expected that number to be down by 10 to 15,000 just because of the virus anyway. So I think you're starting to look at much smaller numbers. And so if all the small states give the exam in July, but none of the big ones do, I don't know that you have enough people. And it might be that the NCBE will be forced. And I think that's why they're waiting for May 5th. As different states make their decisions, I'm sure they're counting down how many bar takers leave with that date in that jurisdiction. And if they end up with too few bar takers potentially for July, I think they'll just shut that down and say they're going to go to a fall date. But I don't expect, there's no way, based on what the NCBE has said so far, there isn't going to be an early September test and a November test and a December test. That isn't going to happen. There is July and there is a fall test date, and that's all that we know at this point. And
on that note, if my jurisdiction offers both a July and a fall exam, can I sit for both?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know the answer yet. I think it'll depend on the jurisdiction.
That's what the NCBE has said, is that they're not going to make that call, but so each jurisdiction. So if that ends up happening in your jurisdiction, you've got to communicate with them and ask that question. I'm sure that's going to be something that's going to come up. So if anywhere ends up giving a July exam, that's certainly going to come up. So yeah, and it's going to be jurisdiction by jurisdiction.
Right. And I could see a jurisdiction saying we're going to give a smaller July exam in order to stay within the numbers that are reasonable given that state's, requirements from their governor, and then say, but we still have more people that want to take the exam, so we're going to offer a third exam in 2020. That would certainly be unprecedented, but we'll see what happens. I wouldn't put anything past the bar examiners of 50 individual states. I mean, they're as we all know, they're pretty autonomous and they tend to do what they want to do. So we'll see what they come up with.
Okay. And something on the minds of a lot of the New York bar takers, what is diploma privilege, and are any jurisdictions going to use it?
Boy, I never thought we'd be talking about diploma privilege, but here we go. So diploma privilege is when you are allowed to practice and become a member of the bar without having to take the bar exam. Many, 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 many years ago, it was the norm in a few states, not many, but some. And then it faded away and basically is gone into extinction, other than, I think, Wisconsin. And what Wisconsin's rule said was you had to go to an ABA accredited law school in Wisconsin, of which I think there's one, and graduate, and then you can be a member of the bar. But for every other jurisdiction, you had to take a bar exam. Now, in what I think is a pretty self-serving move, the 15 New York law school deans wrote a letter to the New York bar, and they said, you know what, we've been thinking maybe you shouldn't have a bar exam anymore for New Yorkers, and that our graduates should all become members of the bar, which is a wonderful fantasy from their standpoint, but that isn't going to happen. There's no way that New York or any other state, in my view, is going to say, sure, you don't need a bar exam anymore. They're far too embedded and far too self-important to think that people can join the bar just because they graduated law school. So there's that, first of all. But let's assume for a moment that the state of New York said, you know what, there's some merit to this idea of a diploma privilege. Well, who would it apply to? And this is where it gets more interesting. As currently constituted, a diploma privilege would only apply to 2020 law school graduates from ABA accredited law schools, at least in New York, and those people who are saying, well, I went to an ABA accredited law school outside of New York and graduated in 2020. Can I get diploma privilege? That would be insane, wouldn't it? I mean, suddenly you'd have every ABA graduate just claiming diploma privilege so that they could be in New York. But there's a third part to this, which is that if there's diploma privilege and it's being discussed, it would require that you work for 18 months under the supervision of a licensed New York attorney. So if I'm in Pueblo, Colorado, and I decide, I went to an ABA accredited law school. I went to the University of Denver Law School, and I graduated in 2020, and now I want to be a member of the New York bar. Well, that'd be great, but I have to find a New York lawyer that I could work for 18 months while I'm in Pueblo, Colorado. Good luck with that. It is very unlikely, in my view, that would happen. So let's go back to the scenario of the New York attorneys. And Megan, you and I were talking about this, 30 years ago, there was a huge economic crash and big law firms shut down and closed off offers. That happened to me in my 3L year. Then it happened to you in your 2L and 3L year a decade ago.
Yeah, during the last recession.
So here we are again. I don't know how many, we're now hearing that some law firms are in fact cutting back, laying off. And I think you were telling me that there's some 2Ls that you're hearing from who are having offers rescinded for their summer work. Right. Yeah. So given that scenario, there might be diploma privilege, and it might be for a certain period of time, but you might not qualify because you can't find a licensed New York attorney who's willing to hire you and supervise you, because it's a lot of work for the attorney and your payroll, and there's all those things. So I think this is a pipe dream, frankly. I don't think diploma privilege is going to happen. And even if it did, it would not be permanent. It would be temporary. So you'd still have to take a bar exam, even after all that. Even if you jump through all those other hurdles and you qualified somehow, that would be a problem. And I think it's just ripe with difficulty and problems. Can you keep people from other states who have have a law school diploma out of New York? I don't know how you would do that. That would be very difficult to accomplish. And so I think, I know it's frustrating, and I know it's sort of distracting, probably, right? That's probably a good statement.
Yeah.
My view is you should ignore all of that. It's just noise right now. People are coming up with some of the most outrageous things. We had a student that told us there was going to be a lottery for their state's bar exam to see if you could sit there. And you and I both went, huh? And we wrote back and said, you sure? Could you show us where you got that? And the person wrote back and said, oh, no, actually, it was just a friend of mine that was speculating about what could happen. So there's a lot of misinformation and rumor out there, which is part of the reason we're doing these discussions. But right now, there is no diploma privilege. There is no plan on the boards to waive the bar exam. There is no plan to let people avoid taking the bar exam. So, register and study as though there's going to be a bar exam. We're not going to be in a position to know anything different. And I think we're so far away from diploma privilege. I just don't see it.
We have a question in the chat box. Can they administer the exam virtually or online?
Well, they haven't. Could they? Maybe, but these are not the, again, there's so many problems. It's just hard to imagine. Security is such a big deal. Exam security, how do you verify that the right person's taking it? How do you verify it's done under the right conditions? And it would still all have to be done online on the same day because the national conference is not going to make unlimited versions of the exam. So again, I think it's more noise and distraction than anything else. I don't think that any bar jurisdiction is advanced enough to put together a virtual online exam in the time frame that they have. Kind of like voting, by mail. It doesn't seem like it would be all that complicated, and they can't get that done. I just don't think they're going to be able to administer an exam for thousands of people virtually or online. They're considering it. The NCBE says they're looking at it, but I don't think they're very far along. So.
Yeah, I think everything I've seen more suggests that this is a good opportunity for the state bars to start moving in that direction and figure out a way to do that for the future. Yeah. But none of them have the infrastructure in place, certainly to do a July 20. I mean, there's just nothing, not to mention that most places where you do an online sort of standardized test, it still involves a large room with a lot of people in it taking the exam. It's just that they're taking it on a computer. So it doesn't really, they're still certainly not going to allow anyone to take this out of their own home because they just don't have a way to figure out how to not have people cheat. So,
and if there's one thing the bar examiners are frantic about, it's cheating. And I think this would open up a lot of possibilities. So.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we're not quite there yet, but it's good that they're thinking about it for the future because I'm sure this is something that, we should be moving towards.
Yeah.
So.
Maybe by the time your children are ready for the bar exam, Megan. I know that a lot of people have been obviously anxious and fearful and concerned about their health. And I think most of you know that I'm a big fan of paraliminal recordings. These are the recordings that come from Learning Strategies, and it's 2 audio tracks, one in the left ear, one in the right ear. The left ear is going to the right brain, right ear is going to the left brain. And essentially, they are getting your mind into a position to be able to absorb this information about a particular topic. And they're incredibly effective. Those of you that use paraliminals, I think, swear by them. We have a set of 16 curated paraliminals, and they are built for our students to deal with a whole series of subjects that might be appropriate for a bar taker. As we started to dive into the COVID-19, I went back to Learning Strategies to Paul Sheely, and I said, what if we took 4 more titles that would be really appropriate at this period of time and made them available at a fairly affordable price? Now, typically paraliminals cost $30 to $35 each. They're digital recordings and they're in your permanent library. And working together with the folks at Learning Strategies, we came up with 4 paraliminals that are not part of our paraliminal pack, but can be purchased now. And up on your screens, you should see an offer for the 4 recordings for $95. Now, the 4 recordings are, the first is anxiety-free, kind of guess what that's about. There is also one on overcoming overwhelm. I find a lot of people right now are just overwhelmed. The kids are at home, the spouse is at home, dogs and cats are at home. It's overwhelming. So that's a second recording. Then there's a recording called Perfect Health, which is really strengthening the mind-body connection. So if you're worried about staying immune and healthy, I think it's a great one to listen to. I listen to it every day. And then there is a fourth recording called The 5 Elements Healing. This uses the approach of the 5 elements of nature, and again, creating this connection between mind and body. In any event, these 4 paraliminal recordings can be purchased for your permanent library for $95. Now, if you already have the Paraliminal pack, you know that you have Anxiety-Free and Overcoming Overwhelm already included. So we have an alternative pack for you. Instead of those 2 recordings, we have a new recording called Fearlessness, which I love, 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 love. And we have another recording called No Matter What. I think of it as whatever it takes, but it's no matter what. So no matter what, you can move forward. So I hope that all of you will take advantage of this. Once you've ordered those, learning strategies will make them available in a library for you. You can download them, put them on your devices. They are permanently yours, and you save, $30 or more by ordering this set of 4 recordings. And then I would encourage everybody with Paraliminals to make sure you're doing at least 1 Paraliminal session a day right now for whatever it is that you find happening, whether it's anxiety or fear, whatever the topic. It's a great way to stay calm and stay focused. It is obviously a rapidly changing environment, and, we'll do what we can. We'll stay where we are. I think, again, our advice to all of you is to keep studying. I think it is going to be a good opportunity for people that take the exam. So remember I told you that there's 45,000 bar takers in July, right? I did some statistical study this week to figure out how many first-time takers of the total people that passed the bar exam in July, how many of them are first-time takers? And the number was pretty staggering. It was 91%. So 91% of the people that passed the exam in July last year were first-time takers. Now, that's significant because we know we've got a lot of repeat bar takers in our course. Here's what I think is going to happen. If a lot of those 3 Ls go away, either because of diploma privilege or they just can't get it together in time or the big box bar reviews putter out, all those various circumstances, those passing spots are going to be filled by somebody. The examiners are not going to go from, let's say, 1,000 people being admitted to the bar to 500 or 400 people being admitted to the bar. That isn't going to happen. That means that there will be more people passing who would not have otherwise probably passed. And I think that's significant and something to keep in mind. So it's part of the reasoning behind our theory that you should be moving forward no matter what. And then if the exam gets pushed back, well, you've got more time to study. But if it doesn't, you're ready and you can jump in. And either way, I think you've got a more favorable applicant pool than you would otherwise. So that's my thought.
Study, take it now, take it whenever the next time is that they're going to let you take it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, all right. So I think I would just say this. I know that all of you are reading and hearing and seeing lots of things. There is very little good information. That's my view. You and I, Megan, have read some articles that just, your jaw drops. Yeah. It's so wrong.
I would read the national conference's site and then your state's site, because we've seen a lot of stuff that's trying to summarize, I think in good faith, trying to summarize what the national conference has said, but kind of getting it wrong and sort of being a bit misleading. And so just, always be checking your sources, go straight to the source. The NCBE has a great update site. You can check. They have a handy little button on the COVID-19 update page that says and it'll show you every state, and they're going to keep updating it with any time a state makes a decision. It'll all be in one spot. So just, and when people say things to you, like a friend of a friend heard that maybe, just don't, just let it go, because it's, until you hear it from the examiners, who knows? And there's a lot of speculation out there. So we just don't want you to be stressed about something that might not even happen.
Yeah. I'm worried that some of you are going to get distracted. Understandably so, but it's not your job to worry about that. It's our job. And we're tracking it pretty carefully and pretty closely. And I can tell you, from having been in the media for most of my adult life in some form or fashion, the newspapers, the media rarely get the story fully accurately. Not because they're trying to give you fake news. It's just hard to wrap the complexity of something into, 700 words. And so a lot of what's being written right now is just nonsense. It just doesn't make any sense at all. And you should not rely on any of that as being absolute. No matter what somebody is saying, whether it's a law school dean or it's a group or it's a task force or it's students signing petitions, those are all true things, but none of them mean anything until the bar examiners make a decision. So don't get caught up in that stuff as much as possible. Stay away from it if you can, I guess is my advice. Well, that's our episode for this week. Obviously, it's a fast-changing world. We will continue to update you as new information comes in. I imagine by next week's episode, we'll have more states announcing what their plans are. We'll also have some additional results from other jurisdictions, and we'll share those with you. And again, we encourage all of you to really think long and hard about what you want to do, but I would encourage you very much to not stay on the sidelines. Jump into the next bar exam, July 2020, September 2020, whatever it might be. We think there's an opportunity there for students to take the exam if it's being given and to get good results. And we want to explain that to you. Again, we've got the free live training. Go to celebrationbarreview.com/now so that you can register and sign up, and we'll see you there. And for everyone, I do hope you stay safe and healthy, and we will see you next week here along the Extra Mile.
Thanks for listening to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at www.celebrationbarreview.com.